First of all, thanks for coming to not your normal classroom. I know that can be kind of a pain, especially when it's not right on campus. My name is Rob Orton. I am the field-based regional recruiter for the Peace Corps. So I cover all of Maine, all of New Hampshire except for Dartmouth and North Shore, Massachusetts. So I'm your go-to guy for Peace Corps if you're thinking about what to do after college. And my idea today is to talk a little bit about Peace Corps, but then relate it to what I did in Peace Corps and what I did after Peace Corps to give you guys kind of an idea of not only what you can do with Peace Corps, but what kind of doors it can open for you, and specifically talk about environmental issues that I encountered specifically in the banana industry in Costa Rica, but really talk a lot about other industries within Costa Rica. So give you kind of an idea of what Peace Corps can actually do for you, but also get you to start thinking about Costa Rica, environment, agriculture, things along those lines. So hopefully you'll find some of what I say interesting, and I'm open to as many questions as you want, even throughout the presentation. If I say something and it makes you perk up, throw up a hand, and there's not kind of just me dumping on you, then you can ask as many questions as you want. So is everybody familiar with what the Peace Corps is? Has everybody heard of the Peace Corps? Everybody remember Dirty Dancing? That's what Baby wanted to do until she started dancing with Patrick Swayze. So the Peace Corps, we're a government agency. That's something that most people don't realize. We're part of the federal government. And what we do is we send volunteers to developing countries that have requested assistance. So these countries have asked for Peace Corps volunteers all the way down to the community level. So the community where I worked in Costa Rica had asked for a Peace Corps volunteer. And we send volunteers out to work in sustainable development projects. We have 6 different sectors. We've got a community economic development sector, which is actually what I did. So I wasn't focused on agriculture or environment. It just happened to be that's what was going on in my community. We also have a youth and community development program, a health program, an education sector, which is our largest sector, as well as an environmental sector and an agriculture sector. And so those might be areas where you guys are interested, but you can fit into any one of our sectors if you've got a degree and the right kind of experience. So the way that we do our work, we focus on the sustainable development aspect, but also on the cultural exchange. So as you are working in these communities and living and working there for 27 months, you're teaching other countries what Americans are really like, so you realize that, so that those countries realize that we're not all the Kardashians, that we're not all Jersey Shore, but also when you come home, then you be a voice for those people. So in a way, I'm also fulfilling my cultural exchange of being a voice for the Costa Rican people and teaching somebody else about a country where maybe they've heard of it, maybe you've got an idea of what Costa Rica is, but I can really kind of give you a first-hand knowledge of what Costa Rica is really like. So moving into my presentation, if we go to the next slide, I'm going to show a map of Costa Rica. So Nicaragua's to the north, and then after Nicaragua follows Guatemala and Mexico and all that good stuff. Honduras is in there as well. For my first 3 months of Peace Corps, I lived just outside of San Jose in a tiny little community. There was actually a coffee growing community. So I've got some experience with the coffee growing industry in Costa Rica, and it's very different from a lot of the other industries, and I'll talk a little bit about that further on in the presentation. But during those first 3 months, I was doing my language training, I was doing cultural training, technical training to get me ready for my job, as well as safety and security on how to stay safe in Costa Rica. And then from there, I actually moved up to just outside of Tikal, so getting towards Boca Tapada, and that's actually a pineapple producing area. So I was there for about 6 months and then actually got moved to another site because of things outside of my control. The community wasn't really as ready for a Peace Corps volunteer as they thought. But I did get a lot of experience within the pineapple industry there. And then from there, I moved down to Siquirres, which is halfway between San Jose and Limon. Limon is one of the busiest ports in all of Central America. A lot of products from all throughout Central America go to Puerto Limon and then get sent up, especially to the east coast of the United States, obviously. But a lot of times they'll leave Puerto Limon and come down to Panama, go through the Panama Canal, and they're headed to the west coast, or if they're headed to the Pacific. So I lived in Siquirres, and this area is a really interesting area culturally. Siquirres was the limit. If you were Afro-Caribbean, so if you were a black person, until the 1970s, you were not allowed to go further into the country than Siquirres. So you can imagine being a citizen of a country and not being able to go to the capital. So there's a lot of cultural strife that goes along with that. I lived in a town that was actually to the east of Siquirres, a town called Pacuarito de Siquirres. In that town, we actually had 3 streets in the town. One street was all black people, and when I would walk down the street, they would all greet me in English. They were all Afro-Caribbean people, so they'd come over to work in the banana industry. A lot of them said, "Oh, I'm from Jamaica," even though they had been born and raised in Costa Rica. They didn't identify themselves as Costa Rican. There was a lot of people that said Jamaican or Trinidadian, or some Dominican, but a lot of people didn't identify themselves as Costa Rican. So that was one street. And that street was actually really interesting because a lot of those guys would go and work on the cruise ships that leave out of Puerto Limon because they spoke English. So they were able to work on the cruise ship and get tips from tourists that were on those cruise ships. And so their houses were really nice, and they really embraced that Caribbean style, really bright colors. Houses up on stilts, we did get a lot of flooding, so that the houses were up, elevated houses. The other street were what we would call mestizo, or Costa Rican people, so they spoke Spanish. So I walked down that street and everybody would greet me in Spanish. And I was lucky because I was such an outsider that I could move between the different groups, and nobody would accuse me of being with one group or the other. I was able to move freely between all the different groups, but they didn't really interact as much as you would think, considering that there was only 3 streets in town. The third street was actually a street full of Nicaraguan people, and a lot of them had come to Costa Rica to work. There's a lot of strife between Costa Ricans and Nicaraguans. They accuse them of pretty much everything that we accuse immigrants of doing, coming over and stealing jobs, coming over and undercutting. Every crime that's committed in Costa Rica, they automatically assume that it was the Nicaraguan person that did it. But so that was the third street. And so again, I was able to move between all those different areas because I was kind of an outsider, but I was also in that community long enough that I made friends on each of those streets, and I was able to move between those groups really easily. So in this area in Costa Rica, there's a lot of banana production. And so if you think about banana production in Costa Rica, it started out in the Atlantic, and then there was a huge plague, killed all the bananas, and this happens more than it should with bananas, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but all the bananas died. So then they moved it over to the Pacific coast and started growing bananas on the Pacific coast. They discovered that it wasn't nearly as good for growing bananas on the Pacific coast, so they moved it back over to the Atlantic coast. And if you talk to the old timers in Securities and in that area, they say that they purposefully killed the bananas to get it out of the Atlantic coast because they were racist against the black people. I'm not sure if that's true or not. I think there's for a number of other reasons. But so now the banana industry is back in the Atlantic coast, and Costa Rica actually gets the highest yield per hectare for their bananas in the world. So they're a world leader in banana production by hectare. So there's certainly countries that grow a lot more bananas. Does anybody know kind of the leading banana producing countries as far as just pure production? It's going to surprise you, I'm sure. China and India actually grow an incredible amount of bananas, and it's all for local consumption. So the bananas in Costa Rica are mostly for export, as well Colombia, Ecuador, those countries where you would imagine are huge banana producers. You imagine that because they're for export, but there's a lot of countries that grow them for domestic use, and a lot of Asian countries are growing them for domestic use, and they don't necessarily export them quite as much. So if we go to the next slide. So these are just a few photos of the banana industry. These are photos of the exact area where I was working. And so after my Peace Corps service, I traveled around Central America. I lived and worked in Honduras and Nicaragua with a couple of different nonprofit agencies. But then I returned to Costa Rica and I studied at the University for Peace, which is the United Nations mandated school. All they do is grad programs. They bring students from all over the world. And I was studying a program called Responsible Management and Sustainable Economic Development. So through that program, we learned a lot of different practices of responsible management of businesses, sustainability, things along those lines. And at the end of my project, or at the end of my degree, I had to do a thesis and an internship. And so because I had some experience in the banana industry as a Peace Corps volunteer, I decided that I really wanted to take a look at the banana industry from an academic standpoint. And so I went back to the same community where I lived, and I worked with a banana producer there what we're trying to do is take a look at sustainability, take a look at how can we start to monitor and evaluate our sustainability. And we applied this standard called the Global Reporting Initiative, which is an organization that's trying to put a number on sustainability. So as you start to look at a business, how can you tell that you're sustainable? How can you tell that you're improving? How can you compare yourself to another business? And it's something that's really important as we start talking about sustainability is how do you measure that and how do you report on that? How do you tell people that you're being sustainable other than just putting green on everything and saying we're sustainable, right? You need to be able to prove that. And so that's what the Global Reporting Initiative is trying to do. So I worked with a banana company called Finca La Estrella, and it's part of an organization. They've got 3 different banana plantations. And what we did was we started to take a look at these different aspects of sustainability. And so the Global Reporting Initiative really looks at all aspects of sustainability, so not just environmental sustainability, which I think is very important, Don't get me wrong, I think that it's really important that we look at that. That's not where my kind of heart lies with sustainability. I look more at labor sustainability and community sustainability. So not only do you need to be environmentally sustainable, you also need to start looking at who your workers are and where you're working, and are you being a positive impact on those communities? Are you being a positive impact on the lives of your workers? So that's what we're really looking at. And so when we start to look at the banana industry, is there anything that you guys notice out of all of these photos? What jumps out at you as environmental students? The plane. What do you think the plane is doing here? Spraying pesticides, right? So that's not water. It rains pretty much every day in this part of Costa Rica, so they're not spraying water on those. They're spraying pesticides. Bananas are actually, there's a lot of problems with bananas. One of the big problems is it's a monocrop. So the banana basically clones itself. And so one fungus, if it affects one plant, it affects all of the plants. And that's actually happened a number of times. We're actually on the second strain of bananas for large-scale export. There was one called the Big Mike banana, and there was a black sigatoka, it's a fungus, and it killed pretty much every Big Mike plant, the Gros Michel plant, killed them worldwide. There's no more of them. So now we're onto a strain called the Cavendish, and the same thing could happen to that. If a fungus comes and it kills it, all of those plants are all susceptible to the same fungus, because the way that the banana works is it's not actually a tree. You can cut right through it with a knife. It's actually an herb, and so it grows up and it puts this fruit out. But then once the plant is mature, then it puts out another sprout. And so next to it, then another plant will grow up. And so for the banana industry in Costa Rica, after 9 months, they just cut the original plant down, take the fruit, leave the plant right there, and then its clone, or its son, as they say in Spanish, el hijo, starts to grow up. And then that hijo will put up another plant and another plant and another plant. So there's no diversity between these plants. And so when a fungus comes in, it can kill everything. The banana plant gets attacked from the top. There's a fungus that eats the leaves. You'll see the leaves turn black, and they just take a knife and they cut it out to try to prevent the fungus from spreading. So there's workers that every single day, all they do all day long is walk through the banana plantation, find any plants that have a little black or yellow on the leaf, and they've got a big knife on a stick, and they just cut that part of the leaf out. That's all they do all day long. The other thing that happens to the banana is there's a nematode that attacks the roots. And so basically it eats the roots, and then the plant will fall down. And so that's why you see all these strings tying up every banana plant in the entire plantation has a string tied to it, and it's tied to another plant. And so that when they lean away from each other, so that they hold each other up. They're top heavy. Bananas were not designed to be these giant kind of bunches of bananas. They were designed, or they originally grew naturally. They don't grow these huge bunches of bananas that are so heavy that it'll pull the whole plant over. But we've decided that we want nice big bananas, and so that's what we get. What else do you notice kind of in these photos that jumps out at you as you start to look at environmental aspects of the banana?
Washing the bananas?
Yeah, so that's a huge vat of water. All it is water. They're just washing off a lot of the pesticides and things. Just, you don't really want to ship that away. But this is huge. I mean, there's probably 50 workers that work just in the washing of the bananas, and so all they do is they put them in there, they leave them in those baths for a while, and then they take them out and they pack them up to send them off. So that's a huge use of water. As well, that water is now contaminated with those pesticides, so when they get rid of that water, what's going to happen? It's going to go into the ground, it's going to go into the rivers, it's going to go into the water system. Does anybody notice anything in this photo here? It's kind of small, so I'm not sure if you can see it. You see these blue things? So there's every bunch of bananas in the entire plantation, and Finca La Estrella, let's see, I wrote it down here. So it's 200 hectares worth of bananas in this one farm, and every single one of those has a plastic bag wrapped around the bananas. That prevents, and those plastic bags are actually impregnated with an insecticide, but they prevent a couple of different things. So they prevent this, there's a certain wasp that likes to go in and they drill a little hole in the banana and they go in and they eat the fruit. And so obviously you can't export a fruit that's been eaten by a wasp. Does anybody know the urban legend about the banana spider? That you get these huge, very venomous spiders in your bananas, and everybody claims that you could, if you buy the right bunch at the grocery store, you might find this big banana spider. That's 100% urban legend. There's no way that a spider is going to make it from the plantation through this water into a box, into a truck, onto a boat, from the boat up to the US, into the grocery store. I refuse to believe that it could happen. But there is this wasp that eats the bananas, and so they impregnate this plastic with an insecticide, and then, again, a person goes to every banana plant in the entire plantation and wraps that around there. The other thing that they do when they're cutting the bananas, they take this foam and they have to stick the foam between each hand of bananas, because Americans don't like it if there's a little black dot on their banana. So if the two bunches of bananas touch, there gets a little black dot on there, and then they're not for export. So what happens when they cut every single day? This farm gets a call from Chiquita Bananas, and Chiquita says how many trucks worth of bananas they want that day. So typically it's 3, but sometimes it's 4. If we go back to the map. So they get packed here at the farm outside Siquirres, and then they go to Puerto Limon. So every single day, Chiquita will call them up and say, we want 4 trucks of bananas today. The workers just wake up in the morning really early, 3:30ish, because they want to work before the sun comes up. So they get to work 4 a.m.-ish, and they get the notice of how many bananas they need to cut, and they cut and pack until those 4 trucks are done, and they get paid by the day. So if they go quickly, they get out early. If they take too long, it takes too long, they get paid the same amount. They get paid piecework by the day of, okay, so we've got 3 trucks to fill today, or we've got 4 trucks to fill today. And so what they do, they go out into the field, and they've got a team of 3. The banana plantation is split up into a grid. They've got these rollers, I guess you would call them, that hang on a wire. So they run out and they cut down all the bananas, hook them onto these wires, and so there'll be a guy and he'll have a belt on, and it hooks to this roller, and then they'll have 12 or 15 huge bunches of bananas, and he'll run, sometimes up to 2 kilometers with all those things tied behind him on these rollers. They'll run in, and then it'll get packed, but there's also somebody that grades the bananas, and so if any of the bananas have that little black mark because they mistreated them, if any of the bananas are broken, if they're too small, if they're too big, if they don't fit the standard of what an American wants in a banana, then they get marked down. And so at the end of the day, if they have too many bunches that got marked down, they actually lose pay. They're expected to grade the bananas and get them in as quickly as possible. And so they do that, and then it goes into that packing facility where they get washed and put into boxes and put into the trucks, and 3 or 4 of those big rigs, those 50-pound banana boxes or 40-pound banana boxes that you see, they get packed right into the truck, and then the truck heads to Limon. So the major struggle that I had with the banana industry was talking about labor and talking about what they do with their workers and how does that affect not only the workers but also the community and also the banana industry. So one of the major things that I noticed, they don't allow their workers to unionize. So workers in Costa Rica are allowed to unionize, and there's actually a banana workers union in Costa Rica. The farms where I worked at, they don't forbid it, but if anybody starts talking about unionizing, they probably don't work there anymore. And so they've effectively made it so that there's no need for a union at that farm, because if anybody starts saying, hey, we should all get together and have a union, those workers that start talking like that typically get transferred to another farm or get let go. The other major thing that I saw as far as payment and treatment of workers, Costa Rican law, each year you get a raise. Whether you deserve it or not, each year you get a 6% raise. And so each year that you work, you get that 6% raise as well. Each year that you work, you get more severance if you do get fired, or if you do quit. So at the end of your term, if you quit your job, they owe you a severance package, or if they fire you, they owe you a severance package. And that multiplies each year that you work for them. So the farm that I worked for actually had figured out a really clever way to get around that. So what they would do is they would have somebody work 50 weeks, take 2 weeks of vacation, and then fire them. And so what they would do is, at the end of 50 weeks, they would say, you're going on vacation, and they would liquidate them. They would pay them their severance package for 1 year of work, have 2 weeks of vacation, and then come back. And so they would rehire them right away. So when they got fired, they said, okay, so I'm not really getting fired. I'm getting let go and then brought back on after my 2 weeks of vacation. So it was really clever because the workers were convinced that this was a benefit to them. Because they would work 50 weeks, they would get a nice chunk of money for their severance pay, they would get 2 weeks to go enjoy that money, and then they would come back to a job. What they weren't realizing was that each year they were missing their raise because they didn't work or they didn't start a second year. And each time they got fired, they were getting 1 year severance pay instead of 1 year plus the multiplier for each other year that they got. So these are things that they try to do, and I don't know if they necessarily did it maliciously. I don't know if they realized what it was doing to the worker. I don't know if they realized how much benefit the worker was leaving on the table like that. But the workers were convinced that this was a benefit to them. And if you think about people living in the developing world, when you get a nice chunk of money, even in the developed world, when you get a nice chunk of money, you feel like you're the king of the world, right? It doesn't matter that you got fired and that you have 2 weeks of vacation and then you start the same job again. They're getting that chunk of money and they're going out and they're great parties afterwards, they buy nice things. So they convinced them that it was a benefit, but in my mind it was not a benefit to the worker. The other thing that they did with the workers is they had worker housing. So if you work for the banana industry, if you work for that farm, you got to live in this house for free. However, what they would do is they would then take that out of your salary. So whether you liked it or not, you were getting a free house and that lowers your salary. So they built these houses in the 1970s, invested in these houses in the 1970s, and have been giving them away for free, but taking out of the salary since then. So the banana industry already made their big investment, but the worker doesn't get to have their complete salary because they're paying rent right out of their paycheck. The other issue with that is if you get fired, if you screw up at work and they say, you're fired, you're out of here, you move out of your house that day. So it's not like you get evicted or you get a month to get your stuff together. It's, you're fired, you're gone, get your stuff out. And so they don't do that when they liquidate people. So if you get liquidated after a year, then they let you stay in your house. But if you get fired for doing something wrong, you're out of here that day. And again, they've convinced the workers that these houses are a benefit to them. And they are. I mean, don't get me wrong. They do have a decent house. They've got cement floors. They've got windows. They've got all that stuff. They've got electricity. They've got water. But what they don't realize is that they're leaving a good chunk of their salary on the table and that they're going to get liquidated after 50 weeks and all of these different aspects. But a lot of times in the banana industry, it's not fun work. It's heavy work. It's hot. It's sweaty. And so there are a lot of times the people that don't have a whole lot of other options. They don't have a high level of education. Nobody's coming with their PhD to cut bananas. Nobody's coming with their master's degree to go wash bananas in the packing plant. So that's what goes on a daily basis there. So they cut bananas. They cut three or four trucks per day at each of these different farms. And when I worked with the owners of the banana plantation, we started talking about different things about how to make life better for these workers and how to make it so that they were getting more money. The number one thing that they would come back to is, where do you want us to get our money? Where do you want us to find that money to pay extra for those workers? And the reason is, bananas are really a game of cents. They make a few cents per box of bananas. And so they said, geez, if we have to pay everybody more, that's cutting into a very small profit margin. Most of the profit for bananas does not go to, so a good chunk does go to the farm owners, but most of it goes to the middlemen, right? So this farm is not owned by Chiquita, they just sell to Chiquita. Chiquita, when they buy them from the farm, they buy them really not at a huge cost. They mark them up and then they commercialize them themselves. They ship them up to the US. They send them out to those grocery stores. The other thing, bananas, how much do bananas cost right now? I don't eat bananas. Does anybody know how much?
70 cents a pound.
So if bananas cost $1.10 a pound, would you buy them? Probably not, right? Americans are really price sensitive to their bananas. If bananas go up by a few cents, they buy apples or oranges or mangoes or whatever else they find in the grocery store. So it's not like people are saying, oh, I'm willing to pay 30 cents more per pound if I get to, if Pedro down on the banana plantation gets a better rate. People are really price sensitive about these things, and so they're kind of stuck in that if they want it to become sustainable, they see that it costs more to become sustainable, and that's why they're not doing a lot of these sustainable things. We go to the photo again, sorry. So a few stats, if anybody loves kind of statistics and numbers and stuff. So the Finca La Estrella, which I said was 200 hectares, they use 204,000 cubic meters of water per year. And that's mostly for washing the bananas. And so when they dispose of that water, again, it's been stained with all the pesticides and everything that they have. It goes into the river. A lot of times you go down to the river and it'll be just the greenest place you've ever been. A lot of times that's because it's killing everything and letting algae and things like that grow. Like it's killing any funguses or anything like that get killed out of the water, so then you get these huge blooms of algae and things like that. And they've cut water throughout the plantation. You can see this ditch here. That's not a river, that's a man-made canal. So the entire river, or the entire banana plantation has these canals, and they're all diverted from the river, so it's all river water, but they're all man-made canals that go through there. There's a lot of caiman, which are similar to alligators or crocodiles, that live in those canals, so the workers always say, they always joke around that if you fall in that water, you won't last long. The other thing, they use 100,000 kilowatt hours per year of electricity. So that's mostly for pumping water, to pump it into these tanks, to pump it into the canals if they need it, to light up the place. Fertilizer, they use 2,125 50-kilo sacks of fertilizer per year. Recently, Costa Rica was just named the country that uses the most pesticides and fertilizers per capita, which is not really a fair assessment. Does anybody know why that's not a fair assessment? What jumps out at you about Costa Rica?
Smallish country.
Very small country that's very much based on agriculture. So if you're a small country and you do a lot of agriculture, per capita you're going to have huge usage of all of that stuff. But it is a worry for them, and it's a worry for Costa Rica especially because a lot of people don't think of Costa Rica as an agricultural country anymore. A lot of people think of it as tourism, right? People go down to the beach, they go down to the mountains, there's beautiful areas. But their economy is very much based on commodities, like bananas, like coffee, like things like that. But they have started to move away from those commodity-based things. They also use 63,000 kilos of plastic bags. They've actually now, there's a small industry in Costa Rica of recycling those plastic bags. So there's recycling plants in Costa Rica that all they do is recycle banana bags and sell them back to the banana industry. Rope 14,000 kilos worth of that string. So those are just kind of ideas of what we're talking about in a small farm. This is a small to medium-sized farm, and there's way bigger farms that are obviously using way more. The other thing to remember, as we talk about those numbers, that's something that they really do try to limit, right? Because that's money out of their pocket. So if they have to buy more bags, that's more money out of their pocket, more money out of their profit. So that's an area where when you talk about sustainability with the banana industry, they're really excited about ideas like that. And so one of the ideas that we came up with when I was talking about water usage was, this tank is about 4 feet high. So it comes up to, she's standing on a bench. So it comes up to about here, and it's filled with water. But the bananas only really need a couple of feet of water. And so we talked about taking one of those tanks, draining it, and filling it with cement so that it's still high enough so that the worker can work in there, but it uses that much less water. And as we started to run those numbers, that was something that they got really excited about, that we could use less water. So that means less electricity for the well, that means less wear and tear on the pump. If one of those pumps breaks, then it's $20,000. So there's a lot of little things that you can start to take a look at of how to make the banana industry a little bit more sustainable. If we go to the next slide, it's going to be the map again. So the next area of Costa Rican agriculture and environment that I want to talk about takes place up in the North Pacific, up in this area of La Cruz, San Jose. Liberia is actually a real big hub for them. There's a lot of flights from the US now land in Liberia because they get you down to these areas here, these beach areas. But inland here and down onto the Nicoya Peninsula, there's an industry of sugarcane. And so sugarcane, it's what we make refined sugar out of. So when you take your white sugar packet and dump it in your coffee, it comes from sugarcane. We go to the next slide. I'm going to show a few photos of sugarcane. So what do you notice right off the bat that's different from this photo to those photos of the banana industry?
It looks more modern.
More modern, yeah. They've got those trucks and they're harvesting by truck there. Do you see how dry it is here? It never turns that brown on the Atlantic coast of Costa Rica. They get weather systems that come up through the Caribbean and it rains year round. Here they have 6 months of dry and 6 months of wet, and you can set your watch by it. That in October it's going to rain the most that it ever rains, and then November, December, January, February, March, April, it's not going to rain. April is going to be the hottest, dustiest month you've ever seen. So much that they take molasses when they make the sugar cane. There's a byproduct of molasses, and they'll put it on the road just to make the dust not come up into your house. And so you'll walk down the street and sometimes it'll smell like molasses. It's because they're dumping molasses onto the road to prevent dust. But so it's really, really dry. What other kind of issues do you see here that jump out at you of this is really how we make this? Yeah, so they burn the entire field. So this has already been burned, and so this is pre-burning, so you can see all that dry chaff. So they set the whole field on fire. And I mean, it's really impressive. If you get up onto a ridge and you can look down, it travels really, really fast. It's like burning grass. It doesn't really burn, because sugarcane is basically a big grass. So they set the whole thing on fire, and it burns all that brown chaff off. So then when they do harvest it, it's hopefully individual stalks that they can just cut down, throw into the truck, and then squeeze and do all that stuff. The people that cut sugarcane, this might be a worse job than bananas. As you go through, after it's been burned, there's this fiber that comes off of it. It feels like has anybody ever touched fiberglass and got fiberglass into your skin? That's what it feels like all over your body, so you'll see them. So it's outrageously hot enough to dry out all this stuff. And they're wearing long sleeve shirts because they don't want to get that fiber all into it, but it gets into under your collar, it gets into your shirt. You're also working with a bunch of burnt material, so it's probably not great to be breathing that in every single day, but they do it. Typically Nicaraguans work in the sugarcane industry because it's a low-paying job. It's something that they can do because a lot of times Costa Ricans don't want to do it. It's kind of not a fun job, so a lot of times Nicaraguans work in that industry. The other issue with burning it is this isn't a closed system. There are animals in that, so the joke is always how many snakes, rabbits, rats, everything like that gets burned when they do that. When I lived in Honduras, we had a huge accident where there were a few kids hiding in a field. They were playing hide and seek, and they lit it on fire, and it moves fast. I mean, it's like a wildfire. So there's issues that go along that. There's no way for them to really tell. I mean, if you look at it, it's really thick. You can't tell 5 feet in there, and these are giant acres and acres worth of sugar cane that they're working with. So they just go ahead and they set it on fire. Once it goes through this process, they cut it down, they squeeze it, they refine it and all that, and then they ship it up. We actually have in the US, there's sugar industry in the south down in Louisiana. They actually have kind of some subsidies and stuff like that to keep their sugar cheaper. Sugar in Costa Rica is outrageously cheap, so they dump it on everything. When they make juice, they'll make orange juice and just spoonful after spoonful of sugar because it's dirt cheap. They make it there. The other issue with the sugarcane industry, all of this wasn't always a sugarcane field. It used to be a forest. A lot of it got cut down to make sugarcane. Sugarcane isn't nearly as positive as far as air quality and things like that that a forest would be. So there's an issue there. We go to the next one. So we've got hot and wet here. We've got hot and dry up here. In this central valley here, which is all mountainous and valleys, it tends to be a lot cooler. Not as pronounced wet and dry season. And so when you see those areas, and when you talk about places like the cloud forest, there's a really famous cloud forest in Monteverde. Those are areas that grow coffee. And so coffee's, I told you, this is a little bit different of an industry. It's much more of a cottage industry, the way that they do it in Costa Rica. And so instead of having 3 banana companies, so there's really, I don't know what the percentage is, but 90-some-odd% of bananas come from 3 different companies: Dole, Del Monte, and Chiquita. And especially now, Chiquita is actually the largest banana company. They bought a company called Fifes, which is an Irish company. So they're actually the largest banana company in the world now. But so you've got Chiquita, Dole, and Del Monte, and they control most of the bananas. Has anybody seen a brand of bananas that wasn't one of those 3? It's really hard to find them. So that industry is controlled by 3 giant corporations. The sugarcane, it's controlled by the refineries, so there's the same refineries refine sugar and sell it out, and then you buy whatever Domino sugar or whatever sugar that you're going to buy comes from those refineries. The coffee industry is much more of a cottage industry in that you have a family that has 5 acres of coffee, and they grow it, and then they have what they call the cooperative, and that's where the coffee gets roasted, and then you've got buyers that buy it from that. we go to the next slide, we've got some photos of the coffee industry. What are some coffee buzzwords that everybody's heard? People tend to be pretty excited about coffee, the buzzwords that go along with it. Anybody heard of shade-grown coffee? So the difference here, this is non-shade grown. So this is just a field of coffee plants, and they probably cut down numerous trees to open up more land for coffee. And this is what we would call shade-grown coffee, so you can see that they've just got it mixed in with the trees. It's actually better, it's easier to grow coffee shade-grown. Coffee doesn't like direct sun as much. Coffee is actually a berry, so it's not a bean like everybody thinks. So this is at the cooperative. So what they do is sometimes they'll dry it, and so this is all the coffee beans or berries have been spread out and dried. But sometimes they just roast it, and so they burn all the fruit off, and then you get this coffee bean that then gets sold as entire coffee beans, or they can grind it right there and sell it. So the nice thing with the coffee industry is that it's typically small farmers, and so hopefully a small farmer is a little bit more connected to what they're doing, and so when they've got people working for them, they take care of them a little bit better. But it's also really prone to migrant workers. And so those migrant workers tend to move around and pick whatever's going on. And so a lot of times with coffee, there'll be indigenous people or Nicaraguan people that are moving throughout the country, picking coffee when it's ready, or getting some work at a banana plantation, or getting some work at a pineapple plantation, just moving around, taking whatever work is there. When I was in Costa Rica, we had this sounds like a sad story, I keep telling you sad stories. It's not all sad, but we had a really sad issue. There was a bus full of migrant workers that, these are in the mountains, so they're really curvy roads, and the bus went right off the road, and 12 or 13 people died. But they were just traveling around trying to make a living picking coffee. The other thing that you hear all the time about coffee is fair trade. The issue with that is, this is not just one farm's worth of coffee. Coffee is a pretty fungible good in that once it's left the plant, you can't tell where it came from. And so because they're doing this cooperative system that not every farm has their own roaster, not every farm has their own processing plant, everybody brings their coffee in these giant sacks. Once it gets to that refinery, once it gets to that area, how can you tell that this was fair trade coffee and this is not fair trade coffee? And so there are systems that you can put into place. You can imagine ways that you would be able to do that, only accepting coffee from fair trade growers. But be very skeptical of anything that somebody says, this is fair trade. There's no way that a fair trade certifier can really know where their coffee came from. These are all coffee beans, all from the same area. The taste is all the same. They look all the same, unless you watch that go from plant to sack to grinder to roaster, all that stuff. There's really no way to tell. I'm also pretty skeptical of organic bananas on a large scale. Anybody that's buying organic bananas, it could be true. The issue is, like we talked about, those banana plants are getting attacked from the top and the bottom constantly. And so you could certainly do it, but you're going to pay a lot of attention to each plant, and you're not going to be able to produce at the large scale so that you're going to be able to get organic bananas up to Maine. It was funny, at the banana plantation, none of the guys like the bananas. The Cavendish banana is maybe the most bland banana you'll ever taste. Do you ever see those finger bananas? Those are really good, right? Those have a much smoother taste. I think that the Cavendish, the big giant bananas, they don't have a whole lot of taste, but that's just me. I've eaten a lot of bananas in my life. So yeah, so that's the coffee industry. Any questions on any of this stuff? Questions? How many people are coffee drinkers? Yeah. How many people, what's your brand? What's your...
Whatever.
Yeah. Anybody have like a particular country that they love the coffee from that country? Do you think anybody can tell? I'm not convinced you can tell the difference.
You know coffee snobs in here?
They'll always tell you, oh, this is a dark roast, so this is better, or this is from whatever. I'm not as much of an expert on the coffee industry as I am on other things. And then the last one that I want to go to.
We've got like Irish.
Yeah, I'll be quick on this one. So I mentioned that I lived in Pital, so I lived in a town called Santa Elena de Pital, which is a pineapple producing area. The issue with pineapples, if we go to the next slide, pineapples grow on the ground, which I didn't know until I got there. I thought that they grew on trees. They do not. They grow on things that look like aloe vera. Each plant produces one fruit, and each plant needs to be sprayed directly by a worker that walks through the plantation and sprays each plant directly. One of the things that they have to do is pollinate them so that they will actually grow the fruit. So now they've got guys that do it now. They've come up with a better system of just spraying even more product onto the plant and just dumping it all over the place. And then you've got this poor guy that walks through, and these plants, you can see how bundled up he is. It's not because it's cold, it's because those plants have kind of teeth on them, so if you walk through too fast or anything like that, you'll get all these scrapes and stuff. And so that's what he's doing. He's getting the bananas. The big issue with bananas is they get this issue that they call golpe de agua, or hit of water. And so part of the fruit will get filled with water, and you can't sell it like that. And if you find, so the way that they commercialize these, if you have a small farm, you just take all of your product and you put it on the side of the road, and a truck will come through and pick it up. If the truck picks up one pineapple that has this issue, the entire shipment is no longer valid. They will not take any of it. So these guys are really careful about making sure that they're not getting that. The way that they prevent it is by spraying it with tons and tons of chemicals. This is another industry in Costa Rica that has a lot of Nicaraguans working in it. So they're, again, more social issues that you start to take a look at. How are we taking care of the immigrants that come to this country? How are we taking care of the folks that are working in these industries? So I'm going to wrap things up, but if anybody has any questions, I'm an open book. Hope I didn't bore you too much with my bananas and stuff.